let's hear about what made you who you are today. Let's hear about your upbringing. And I'd love to hear your upbringing, your mom, pop, what gave you the work ethic and all the cool things that make you.
I sit here and smile as you ask me that question because it was truly a wonderful period of time in my life. I grew up in a really small town. I grew up in Ottawa, Illinois.
Sure.
My father was an Allstate insurance salesman, and he was Big Al Robinson. And if you bought insurance, if you needed insurance, and you
went to Big Al.
You knew who he was. And I learned from that. I mean, he was a guy that was all about customer service. He worked for Allstate Insurance, which was a great company, but he was available 24/7. I do remember getting phone calls, and he would get phone calls at midnight. You know, my daughter was out in her car with 3 friends and wrapped her car around a telephone pole. You know, what do we need to do? And he would always make himself available. My mother, who was truly a very business savvy person, never went to college. I don't even think my mother finished high school, quite frankly. She was a vice president of a bank and a branch manager and ran a bank. And talk about customer service and knowing between my parents, one of the two of them knew everybody in a town of 16,000 people. I mean, everybody. So I grew up in that kind of a family, where you got involved, you participated, you served on school boards or Kiwanis Club or Lions or whatever all those things were in a small town. That's just what you did. And it was part of your responsibility as being a citizen. And I learned that really early on, which is why I've always been uber involved in actually anything I get involved in. I like to just add value and participate. And that's kind of defines who I am. But yeah, I mean, I had some great experiences and mentors and people throughout my life. I was, again, I don't brag, but I'm talking about, who I am. I was the president of my senior class. I was president of student council. I played varsity tennis. I was just always involved. Worked as a kid. I started delivering papers when I was 8 years old. I took my brother's paper route over, and my mother had to sew the paper bag up like way up high because it would drag on the ground because I was so short. And I sold delivered newspapers and worked at gas stations and worked in factories and just kind of.
You always knew how to put cash in your pocket, didn't you?
Yeah. I just didn't want to be dependent on anybody for that.
That's awesome. And what did that mean to you? I mean, when you're able to, make money, your own cash, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, right? How about that feeling?
It's very freeing. It truly is. I mean, if you want to go to the Schwinn bike place and buy a bike, you can do it. Yeah.
Free spirit is what I was looking for. I was looking for that at Sears, the Sears store in Fox Lake. My eyes glowed at the free spirit, the new free spirit bikes every time they came out, right? Yeah. Eventually I bought myself one of those.
There you go.
Paid cash for that thing.
Yeah.
Like $175, I think it was back then. It was the best.
The thing you made me have a great memory. I just remember being 8, 9 years old, working a paper route, and just simple things like having to balance a budget. I had to pay for the newspapers.
Absolutely.
And then I delivered the newspapers. And then once a week I had to collect the money and make change and make sure there was money in the account to pay for the papers the following week.
Give a few extra smiles and a little conversation for a little bigger tip. Instead of 50 cents this week, maybe $1.50, right?
That's right. That's right.
What paper was it?
The Daily Times.
I delivered the Tribune, the Chicago Tribune. I delivered.
Yeah, the Daily Times in Ottawa, Illinois.
Did you have
I had 51 on my route, 51 newspapers.
I only had 35 to 40 I had at any one time. But we had these Sunday papers. They're stupid, crazy heavy. Did you have those?
No.
Ours were like 5 inches thick, every paper. It's crazy. You had to stuff them with all this garbage in them on Sundays. And it was heavy. I mean,
so you're delivering them on bicycles?
Bicycle,
yeah.
In the wintertime?
Fun story about that is I remember I was going to create efficiency, looking for faster ways, more efficient ways. So I thought if I took 5 or 10 minutes and wrapped a rubber band around a newspaper and then threw it from my bike, I wouldn't have to walk up to each doorstep and stick it in the door. Save an enormous amount of time. The Capitani's house, right next door to mine, was the very first paper I delivered every single day.
Mm-hmm.
The very first time I did it, I threw the newspaper and threw it right through their glass wall. So I had to learn. I had to do some things different.
But
I had to tweak the system.
But think about that, right? Nowadays, unfortunately, kids don't have the opportunity to do these jobs, right? At any age they want, right? And then we have these laws against that stuff, right? A kid could want to work as much as they want to work at 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And boy, there's no jobs for them.
Right.
And the law says you can't work that kid. That's wrong. That's illegal for that 12, 13-year-old kid to work. Right. But boy, if they want it bad enough, it's such a great lesson.
Yeah.
I mean, think of the lessons you learned right there in efficiency. You're thinking efficiencies. Well, gosh, you took that into your business world 20, 30, 40 years later than today.
That's right. That's right.
So, I mean, that's an advantage for you to have and I to have that kids don't have today.
Well, I always look at it as failures too. I mean, when you're young and you're failing, that's a way easier thing to do than when you get older, right?
To pay for that glass door, I had to pay for there goes your profits for a month.
I'm telling you,
you
learn real quick. You got to fix things when you do stuff like that.
So I made $6 a week is what I made, and then my tips, I hoped and prayed that I'd get a few dollars in tips every week. So it was somewhere between $8 and $10 a week that I'd make on my paper route. And that was 7 days a week. Yeah. Right. I don't know what you made.
About that. I was probably banking about that. And mine luckily was, we had 6 days a week. We didn't do Sunday papers.
You dirty rat. You got to win. You probably made as much as me too. You know, I know.
Well, I had 51 papers. You only had 36.
Right, okay, there you go.
That's a long route in the wintertime.
It was.
Man.
It was.
So I had a picture of me when I was like 11, 12 years old. I was in a boat. We were in an area that flooded. We were in a low rent district where we lived, right? Because it flooded every year. It was old cottages that turned into full-time homes, and nobody was prepared for the flooding that happened every spring and sometimes fall. So I had a picture of me delivering papers in a boat, you know, and it was funny because I had to get those papers delivered, and I didn't think any of it. But that took a picture. It was in the Tribune. Here's a kid delivering the Chicago Tribune in a boat. And I got all my papers delivered. And these people, you know, half of them weren't home, but half of them were in their homes while they're flooded totally around them. Right.
Work ethic.
You know, I mean, but again, I just had to figure out how to get them to them. I didn't realize that this was different than the other newspaper. Boy, I thought anybody would do this. Right. I guess some people shut it down.
The newspaper's gonna be all soggy then when they get it too, right? So
no, I usually kept it dry. I figured out a way to keep it dry, however it was. Usually their stoops were dry, otherwise they for sure weren't home, right? But you know, fighting the carp to get there was a whole nother story.
Luckily, you didn't have Asian carp jumping in your boat.
We had some big carp. I had a spear in my boat, and after I delivered papers, I would spear carp where they'd be caught in an area. Yeah. It was Well,
speaking of
whole nother story.
Speaking of kind of fun stories and things that went on and how you grew up, to tell you how small a town it was. I had a buddy of mine, Paul Girding, and I would get up in the morning at 3:30 every morning during duck hunting season, and we would literally go out on the river in a boat and go to our duck blind in the morning before school and go duck hunting. We would drop our take that day off at the shore. My mother would pick it up and then bring it back to the house so we could clean it later. But we would walk to school with shotguns, uncased, and put them in our locker. And then leave school at 3:30 and go back out duck hunting in the afternoon until dark.
What would happen today, right?
Oh, can you imagine bringing a shotgun to school today?
Yeah.
Anyway, those are fun stories from my childhood. But I'll talk a business story, just for fun. Jack Cassidy, there was 3 men that owned a gas station in our town called Jensen Rutledge Cassidy, JRC. And literally there could be gas stations all over town with nobody at the pumps. And this was a gas station that people would literally line up out into the street to wait for fuel because they knew how to treat people like a customer.
Wow.
They didn't ask if you wanted the windows washed. They didn't ask if you wanted the oil checked. They didn't ask if you wanted the air pressure and your tires checked. They just did it.
Awesome.
Every single time. And Jack Cassidy, I learned a great story once. He would they had a coffee machine. You put a nickel in and bought a cup of coffee in a paper cup. And I remember him doing that. And I thought I was going to be a smart, young entrepreneur at 15, by the way. And I said, Jack, I got a really good idea. Why don't we go to the store and buy one of these 25 cup coffee makers and just put it out in front and make a pot of coffee. And when somebody comes in, you give them a styrofoam cup full of coffee rather than going in and put a nickel in the machine. He said, Scott, you don't understand the difference. He said, if I did that, I would be giving them a free cup of coffee. By going in and placing a nickel in the machine and asking them how they like their coffee with cream and sugar, and pressing the button for them and visiting them with them while the coffee's being made and then handing it to them, that's marketing. So I learned my first marketing lesson at 15 about
relationship building.
Huh? That's it. It was relationship building. That's what they were all about.
That's awesome. So do you know that this might be a popular service in the future, right? Do you hear about Illinois? Illinois is trying to pass a bill right now where we can't pump our own gas anymore. Oh, it's on the table right now.
I'm all about that.
How about that?
I'd love it for go back to full service gas stations.
But how crazy is though? Where you can't pump it if you want to. Now I like to pump my own gas. I like the smell of gas. Maybe I don't know about asphalt gas. But anyway, you're not going to be able to do it if they pass this bill. And the cost of gas, which we're one of the most competitive gas prices in the country. Not right. We're one of the highest now.
It'll skyrocket with that.
It'll be 30, 40 cents more a gallon
at least. Yeah.
And then they might unionize that and think what that look like. So either way, it's
what's their justification for the change? Why do they want to change
they talk about environmental, that we're not smart enough not to spill it, right? And then there's methods you can use that make sure you don't spill it, right? Either way, but bottom line is mostly environmental and job creation. This is job creation for these smart people way smarter than us, of course.
Yeah,
running our state. Wow. Either way, no politics. Get out the politics, Scott. Okay,
I'm not bringing it up.
Back to the business story. I love it. I love that the customer service that drove people to line up when they didn't have to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome people couldn't wait to be told that they were good looking that day, or boy, you look like you've lost weight, or whatever. That's a great tie you have with your suit, Bob. I mean, they would love that. Cool. And that's what these guys were so great at. So they put in a total, 9 kids through college, 3 guys on a gas station.
Wow.
But think about that differentiation, right? It's something simple everybody can do. There's no business out there. None. They can't separate themselves.
That's right.
By going over the top with a customer service like that, right?
And
I know we talk about all day long, but do we go that far? I don't think so.
That's an easy differentiator.
It's huge.
If you just focus on it.
Isn't that awesome?
Customer service. Because somebody told me once, an old boss of mine 1,000 years ago, Charlie Powell, I haven't mentioned his name in 30 years, but he said, if you get into the executive search business, all you have to do is do what you say you're going to do, because nobody else does that. Wow. And I'll never forget that quote. So I just said, when I get in this business, I'm just going to do what I say what we say we're going to do. Just follow through. Let's go there.
Let's go. Your school, like let's say college. Where'd you go?
I went to Illinois State University. I played tennis at Illinois State University.
Is that Ivy League?
No.
I pictured you as an Ivy League. I messed that up. Okay.
No, not Ivy League at all. It was a great place to go to school, though, and I got a great education there. And then I always knew graduate school was going to be in my future. So I graduated from college with a degree in psychology. I was going to be a psychologist. That was my passion. I had a high school psychology teacher. It was just Don Sutherland was his name. And it's probably the only high school teacher I can remember his name, but I do, because he was my favorite teacher and psychology was my favorite subject. So I got an undergraduate degree in psychology. I went to go work on a doctorate at George Williams. And I got about 2.5 years into this program, or 2 years into it. And I went with a professor friend of mine, Richard Dorgan, to some private clinical practices. He had a private practice to do marriage and individual counseling. And I got permission to go and do a 3-month practicum with him, and his clients would sign a release letting me kind of sit in the corner and watch what he did. And I just absolutely hated that job. It was depressing. Everybody's glass was half empty. I'm like Gary, one of my glass is always half full. And it was just down. It was too down for me. So I went to Richard.
How long did you work there for before you realized that?
Oh, I was there maybe 2 weeks.
Oh,
literally.
It was quick then.
Yeah. And then within 3 months, my practicum was done. And I said, now I don't know what to do with myself. And he gave me great advice. He said, Scott, stay here and finish your master's in clinical psychology, and then add a master's in business, get your MBA and go into corporate America. So that's what I did. And my wife, who will listen to this podcast, will laugh at this next comment. But my wife at the time, I was married, going through graduate school. She was working full time. I wasn't working for our first 2.5 years of marriage.
Deb was your sugar mama.
She was my sugar mama. And listen to this. Not only that, she worked at Federal Signal Corporation, and she worked for the chairman of the company. And when I graduated from graduate school, Federal Signal hired me. And that was my first job. They thought enough of her and her work ethic to put this crazy guy through college, through graduate school, that they thought.
This is a little bit the start, like the start of the Obama story. It sounds like, right?
Oh, we weren't going there. I thought we were going to politics. Let's stay away from that.
She not only was a sugar mama, she found you. She had to find you a job because you couldn't find it yourself. Probably.
She would stay after work every night and type my thesis for my graduate degrees. And finally, the chairman said, "What are you doing here every night? Till 7 or 8 o'clock at night?" And she said, "My husband's in graduate school." And he said, "I want to meet this guy." So we set up a coffee, and I met with the chairman of the company. And I don't know if he felt sorry for her or liked me, but either way, he gave me my first shot, which is where, quite frankly, I got some unbelievable experience way too fast for what I was ready for. But happenstance was the situation. I felt I was in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people.
Right.
All three very good ingredients to success.
Yes.
And I met a guy named Tim Covey. Who is my mentor and still is to this day. I mean, he's now in his 70s and lives and retired in Wisconsin. But Tim Covey made my career without a doubt. He gave me my first opportunity. And speaking of mentoring, we were talking about that earlier. They fired my boss, and he told me that I was going to do that job. I was the vice president of human resources at the time. Wow. And they fired him. And he said, "You're going to handle this job until we hire his replacement." And long story short, they never did hire his replacement. So I was given that role at the age of like 24.
Wow.
Very cool.
For a $1 billion company.
What?
And,
I didn't realize
and he said, "I want you to come into my office every morning at 8 o'clock and tell me what you're going to do. And then I want you to come into my office every night at 5 o'clock and tell me what you did."
Nice.
And he became my mentor. And I learned how to negotiate union contracts and
Holy cow.
hire and fire and
How
run.
valuable is that for your future?
And then he left Federal Signal and was recruited as the chief operating officer and president for a large group of companies for Bally Corporation. And he recruited me to Bally Corporation as his vice president of human resources. So at 26, I think I was a VP of HR.
So through this time, you're learning all about recruiting too.
I was recruiting and coaching and managing and mentoring. And
but for the start of this thing, I mean, it was Deb that got you the job. I mean,
that's why I've been married 38 years.
I think
Gary.
you still use Deb as I mean, you got to close something big. I bet you bring her along with you because you out-hit your coverage by so much. It's crazy. I'll kick your coverage, I should say, right? This woman, good, beautiful blonde. I guess you're about the same age, but nobody'd believe it if they saw the two of you together. And you don't look any older than you are. You actually look a little younger, but she makes you look old, buddy. I'm telling you, she's beautiful. She's sharp.
Right.
You still using her to close things like that?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story. I left Bally Corporation to start a company. It now goes back 33 or 34 years ago to start this company. And one of the services we were.
How old were you at that time then? You don't mind.
I was 29.
Wow.
28. I'm 62.
To start this company, you're 29.
Yeah. And one of the businesses we were going to have was going to be the outplacement business. We were going to work with companies when they let people go.
Sure.
And I literally just started this business. I didn't even hardly have a manual done yet for the outplacement, which I wrote. And I was trying to sell outplacement services back in the day, along with executive search. Those were the two businesses at the time. And my wife, Debbie, went to a bar one night with a bunch of girlfriends. And there was a hockey team in this bar partying that was the sponsor of their team. It was a restaurant in Naperville, a Mexican restaurant in Naperville. Long story short, she met the vice president of sales and marketing for Polaroid. They got into a discussion and she said, what's the biggest problem you're having at work right now or something? He said, well, I feel really awful. I've got to let 30 people go next week. And she said, well, my husband's in the outplacement business. She sold my very first piece of outplacement business to Polaroid Corporation by going out for cocktails and meeting a guy on a hockey team.
That's great. Yeah. So the 2.5 years in grad school, right?
Yeah.
Did you know what you wanted to do?
No.
Okay.
I was just taking the advice of a guy that I really respected, Dr. Dorgan, and I just figured if I got a master's and an MBA that I'd find something.
Yeah.
And Federal Signal luckily had a GE-based rotation program, so I would spend a month in one role, then a month in another role, then a month in another role.
Yeah.
And I happened to wind up in HR right when they were negotiating a union contract. And it was very, very ugly. The union didn't like us, and we didn't necessarily like the union.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of a silly, goes back to Gary's comment earlier about, I can't imagine, I write them a check and they do the work. And, that was kind of the mentality. Culture wasn't a consideration. And so I didn't think that made a lot of sense. So I asked to meet with John Cariglio, the business agent of the union, and resolve 101 outstanding grievances, and also negotiate a contract to get a change of work rules and be able to move people around more fluidly, which saved us a lot of money, which allowed us to give them more money than they were asking for.
Wow,
so not only did the company save millions of dollars, but the union employees got more money than they were asking for.
Yeah.
So after that event, I was kind of the labor relations guy. So I would travel around negotiating union contracts after that.
Wow.
That's a short story to a very long story.
No, that's good. Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
And then when did it sounds like before that even there was a passion for helping, and coaching. And is there something that came into your life that was really revealed that to you? Or
I can't say there was an instance. I goes back to my high school teacher in psychology and understanding human behavior. And I really got enamored with motivators. What motivates you to do what you do versus the same thing doesn't necessarily motivate Gary, and the same thing doesn't necessarily motivate Chris. So it was very interesting to me how if you could figure out what the motivators were in an individual, you could get them to perform at a higher level, whether it be personal life or work life.
Sure.
And I found that just super fascinating. And then I kind of got into the whole marketing thing and what motivates people to buy one product over another, and the psychology of marketing, and it all just kind of evolved through that.
So I mean, it seems like a simple thing, right? But boy, what a great point that is, right? If you can figure out what motivates people, they're going to work harder. They're going to work faster, harder, more efficiently. They're going to love what they do. They're not going to count hours, right?
Right.
And it's something I think we're all probably weak at usually.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we kind of think we expect people to be motivated by something, whether it be dollars or whatever. We kind of expect something, and we perceive that when it may not be true sometimes.
Right.
And so that might be when we don't get the production we're looking, or the output we're looking for out of that person, right?
Yeah, it is. And I'm probably a little naive to this, but it goes way back where my philosophy comes from. And there's two things that I just kind of live by and have, and that is I don't count vacation time with anybody that works for me, and never have. Whatever people need to take off, they take off as long as their work's getting done. I could care less. And when they're gone, they've got to have somebody backing them up, so that when they're not there, that somebody else is responsible. So that's one thing, and then the second thing is I tell people this all the time: treat this business as if you owned it. Make any decision you want with any client you have, or anything you need to do to make this a better place to be. And if it's wrong, we'll figure that out and we'll fix it. But 99% of the time it's right. And it gives them more ownership into the business. It's a good psyche thing for your head to feel like you can make decisions and not have to go to somebody and get an answer all the time. And it gives people a sense of responsibility.
So what an awesome point again, right? I mean, guys, think about this. If you hire for the right culture, and you know that these people are out for your best interest, the interest of the customer, the interest of your team, right? If you know that, then why can't they make decisions like they own the business every day?
Absolutely.
Right? And again, I'm not sure we do the best job of that. So I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this, because I probably, I got to be coaching our team on this a little more. But again, it seems simple, but it's a fact. Most people that I know don't do that. They don't tell every person on their team, from the person that's the first day on the team to the 20-year veteran, that this is treated like your business, and make decisions like it's your own business.
Yeah.
And if you fail fast. Let's learn from the failures. As long as we learn from the failures, we're going to get better, stronger. Yeah,
I go back to my comment earlier about Tim Covey, the guy at Bally and Federal Signal that mentored me. And I'll never forget his now famous quote that I've made famous for him. But it was simple. And his whole theory was common sense prevails. That was his big line. And that's my line. Common sense prevails. So if somebody says to me, you want me to treat this business as if it were my own, how am I going to know how to make the right decision if I'm in a situation? Common sense prevails. Use your common sense, a combination of experience and education and intellect. If you take those three things together along with a bread of common sense, you're going to make the right decision.
Sure.
Almost invariably.
Yeah.
Especially if the hiring process is done right? Because you have that trust.
It goes all the way back to the people you hired.
Right.
I know it sounds hokey.
Darn Scott, everything goes back to hiring and coaching, mentoring, hiring, coaching.
I hate to say it like a commercial, but it really does. It really does. It's all about the people.
Yeah.
If you have the right machinery to do your business or the right, intellectual property or whatever all those things are that you need to run the business from a technical capacity, what's left?
Yeah.
It's the people.